Well, hello friends and welcome to Ask Zach. Today we're going to talk about one of the most collectible and iconic catalog guitars of all time, and that's the Buck Owens American. This guitar was made by Harmony and sold in the Sears catalog, and I guess in Sears stores also, for a brief period of time. It was really kind of like 71, 72, maybe into early 73, and then it was gone. And it's kind of lived on through both Buck and also some other players that have used it through the years, that have made it so popular that these guitars go for, $2,000, $3,000 now, especially depending on condition. And they are cool guitars. So today I'm going to tell the story of how this guitar came about. I'm going to talk about how to date them, and a lot of the things that kind of Buck's thoughts as he was putting this guitar together, having it made. Also going to talk about, of course, the players that, besides Buck, that popularized it and have kind of driven up the prices in the last couple of years. And then finally, I'm going to tell the amazing story of how Buck Owens from beyond the grave provided for his estate, his company, his Crystal Palace, kind of honky-tonk with these guitars. So it's a incredible story that only Buck Owens could do something like this. So, all right. So before we dive in, I just need to thank all my Patreon supporters. It's because of you that I'm able to do this. If you want to find out more, then go down into the description. You can find a link to Patreon. All right, let's dive in. So in the late 1960s, 1969 to be exact, Buck Owens started performing on a television show called Hee Haw. And of course, it was kind of a country version of Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, which was a very popular kind of comedy show at the time that had a lot of guests on it. And the difference is that Hee Haw had musical guests, and of course they would perform, and it was more of course a music show, and also it was very rural. And as part of the show, Buck had a special acoustic guitar built for him by Simmy Mosley of Mosrite fame. He had a red, white, and blue acoustic constructed, and that's what he used on the show. Well, the show turned out to be pretty popular, and people started asking about the red, white, and blue guitar. Well, Buck was smart enough to know that that Mosrite, at that point, probably couldn't construct all the guitars that he needed, and so he decided to reach out to Gibson. So he began negotiations with Gibson and its mother company, CMI, and pretty soon Buck kind of backed away from it being an actual Gibson model because of cost consideration. So Buck wanted this guitar to be affordable, and if you looked at something like the cheapest Gibson acoustic at the time was the LGO, which was an all mahogany model that had ladder bracing, which that's usually your most inexpensive acoustic guitars have ladder bracing on them, which for those that don't know, it means the top of the guitar, instead of having X bracing, it has just straight pieces of wood that are put across, either 3 or 4 of them usually. So an LGO was around $179 back in the day, which in today's money would be about $1,300. Well, Buck wanted to charge $82.95, which in today's money would be about $622. So that's of course accounting for inflation. So the decision was made to shift it from being a Gibson-made model to being a Harmony-made model, which CMI also owned Harmony. And so Harmony guitars were, of course, made in Chicago. So instead of it being a Kalamazoo Gibson-made instrument, it was shifted to being a Chicago-made Harmony guitar. So Buck had certain, considerations that he wanted. He wanted it to play really easy. He was very difficult about the prototypes and about it being exactly how he wanted it to look and sound and feel. And so this has a 25.5-inch scale length. You've got a mahogany neck, as far as we know, rosewood fretboard, birch back and sides, and the top is spruce. And you can see the spruce right here on this little ring in the middle where it's unpainted, which is kind of a neat touch inside. Inside the little rosette, you have the spruce. Of course, you also have a rosewood bridge, and it's adjustable, which was something that was a major consideration for Buck. He wanted it to play well, and it has a truss rod also. So even though it was a budget-friendly model that was going to be sold in the Sears catalog, he wanted it to be a good, solid instrument that a early player, a young player could afford, but also that would still be a good stage instrument. And he used these. So, of course, he used the Semi Mosley guitar, and the way it's easy to identify when he's playing the Mosrite made one is it does not have this headstock shape. It has the Mosrite M on here. Now, of course, this one is missing its head plate, which is a very common occurrence. So we'll talk more about that later. So, of course, he did a red, white, and blue paint scheme on the guitar that, of course, also covers the back of the neck and the body, and it's really cool. And it was a way of, during a turbulent time in the U.S., Buck was wanting to show his patriotism, and so it would kind of start with this, with the Mosrite guitar and the Buck Owens American. And then it would go on to also be, this paint scheme would also be put on a number of Telecasters and P basses and such that the Buckaroos would use live. So the instrument finally, made it, to the Sears catalog in the fall of 1971. And of course, as I said before, it sold for $82.95 without case, and these would arrive in a Sears box, and they would be, pretty well packed. And it was originally called the 1219, and even though they have an H169 number in the body, and that could be, the Harmony version of the model, but as far as Sears was concerned, it was the 1219L. So, of course, these sometimes will have, different stamps inside of them. And the way you date them is that in really small, in a really small stamp, they will have an F or an S, and that stands for, some people say it's first half of the year, some people claim it's fall. I think it's first half of the year, but it could be fall. And then S, which would be second half of the year or spring, depending on how you land on that. And then the next two digits are the year. So this guitar has an F70. So this was made in 1970. So it looks like they geared up and made a bunch of these guys in 70 and then started selling them in the catalog in 71. Buck negotiated some kind of, we don't know if it was a flat dollar rate or if it was percentage, but he indicated that he was getting $250 a guitar and that his first royalty check was for $15,000. So that would seem that they sold about 6,000 of them, at least, right off the bat. So that's pretty impressive. Yeah. So this guitar was not meant to be a regular model in the Sears catalog. It was supposed to be a limited edition, and so it was basically sold through 1973, and then it stopped. And then, of course, 2 short years after that, in 1975, Harmony would completely close its doors and have a big auction, and they would sell off everything. So this kind of connects with a later part of the story. but somehow Buck ended up with at least 600 of these. Okay, so original Harmony American guitars. He ended up with hundreds and hundreds of these guys and had them in storage out in Bakersfield, California. And I don't know if this was part of his deal with Harmony or whether he got them when they were auctioning off everything, but regardless, he ended up with a bunch of these, and of course, we're gonna touch on that in a moment. So Buck, of course, played this guitar, all through the Hee Haw years, all through the 70s and into the 1980s, and he then had a reissue made in Korea that was nearly identical, except that it has a non-adjustable bridge, and then it does not have the natural spruce here. It's painted white here, but it has the headstock, of course, the one that I don't have, and otherwise it looks really close to an original one. But that's the way you tell the difference, is it has a non-adjustable bridge and then it's painted white here on the inside. Next came in the early 2000s, Fender had worked with Buck on a Japanese-made red, white, and blue Telecaster, and apparently Buck had worked a deal where they made more of these guitars that had this headstock shape, except it said Buck Owens in script and then had the 3 stars. And those were made in China. And so Buck had a bunch of those made up, and he would sell them from his Crystal Palace there in Bakersfield. Let's talk about some of the players that really helped popularize this guitar besides Buck. Now, of course, Buck kind of made this thing iconic, and I have to show this now. So I have a Buck Owens coloring book. So this is an original one from the 70s that was Omnivore Recordings actually included this with like a plastic 45 that they sold a number of years ago. I think it was for record store day. And this is really hilarious. And of course, you have Buck with the red, white, and blue guitar. But this has all sorts of little crazy things. After playing golf, Buck practices his new American guitar before his recording session. I think that's a little bit of promotion for this guitar. All right. Players besides Buck that used this. The first one that really helped popularize it was Pat Smear with Nirvana. So he played on the MTV Unplugged, and he was playing one of these that apparently was the bass player's guitar, and he had it both mic'd, and he had a Bill Lawrence soundhole pickup in there, and you can plainly see the big black smooth covered pickup with the Bill Lawrence gold script on there. So that kind of made it a cool and interesting guitar because of its appearance on Unplugged, which was an incredibly popular television show. But the guy that really threw these guitars into the stratosphere as far as what their worth is and their collectability is Ryan Adams. So Ryan started playing these guys, and immediately they shot up in value. And there's a really cool video with that Stu Mack did with Dan Erlewine restoring his. So these sometimes can have some issues because they're not badly built instruments by any means. This is a good guitar, and it has a good sound to it. Not a bluegrass guitar, even though I kind of played some quasi-bluegrass there. It doesn't really have enough low end to it, and part of that has to do with the adjustable bridge. So whenever you have an adjustable bridge, basically you have the strings sitting on this bridge piece here that then is basically hitting the wood only with 2 points. So you have the screws here, so you don't have really good contact. But it's a good, loud guitar, and really to a sound man, this is a amazing sounding guitar because it doesn't have the woofy low end that a sound man is just going to pull out. It's loud, it's ringing, it's bright, and those are all things that Buck wanted, because I mean that's what he wanted his guitar to sound like, because that's what everything, with Buck, everything was kind of bright and ringing and twangy. And so, yeah, it has a very clear sound, and of course you can finger pick. So really, really cool guitar. But again, yeah, it was really Ryan Adams that really took these things into the stratosphere as far as collectability. And again, these are going in the $2,500 to $3,000 range. There are a number of guys that do restorations on these. Some of them will just, kind of fix them up some. Other guys will change them to X-braced, because this is a ladder-braced guitar, and that was part of how to keep the instrument less expensive. And so again, instead of X-bracing, it has a couple ladder braces on there on the top. And so there's guys that will take the back off and they will convert it, and they'll also take off the bridge. Well, some of them will change this. They'll pull the adjustable part out and they'll reuse this, and they'll put an insert in there that's solid, that's non-adjustable. Yeah. And then you have other guys that will just completely replace the bridge altogether. All right. So the biggest problem with these old guitars that were made by Harmony are the headstock kind of overlay decal. So here you can see a piece of it. So this was printed on a kind of pickguard, white pickguard material that unfortunately would warp and become brittle, and it would just break off. So there's a number of different guys that will fix these. At times there are decals that are sold that are just the white part that says Buck Owens American and the 3 stars. Sometimes people will sell a decal that has the blue part also, and basically you would need some kind of white pickguard material or wood that you can do that with. Scott Baxendale does, what he does is he makes a wood veneer, and then he paints it white and blue, and then puts a transfer on there for the Buck Owens American logo and the 3 stars. But so right now I'm in the process of, I had someone that watches the show that is very, very kind. He was kind enough he's going to be sending me a decal that has the blue and the white on there. So I'm going to need to make some type of background for this. So I'm trying to decide whether to have something made out of wood or to make something out of white pickguard material. But yeah, so I will be fixing this at some point. One of the things that's really significant about this guitar to me is the Buck Owens acoustic, the Harmony, like this. This was the first really cool guitar the first guitar I ever saw in person. I remember being a little kid and going over to my grandmother's neighbor's house, and the teenager that was living there, he had this sitting on a couch, and I remember vividly seeing it, and it had a guitar pick, wedged in the strings. And I just thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And the teenage boy made it very clear that if I even tried to touch it, he was going to hurt me. So I did not touch the Buck Owens American that was, and this was in the 1970s when I saw it. But it's always kind of held a draw for me. So I need to thank Aaron Parker at Glaser Instruments for selling me this. He had 2 of them, and he reluctantly parted with this one. And this one does have a headstock break, but that doesn't bother me at all. It just made it to where it was a little more affordable. So, because again, these guys are not inexpensive anymore. Let's see. let's finish out with the way that Buck provided for his company after the fact, after his death and during COVID. So this information and some of the information before came from Jim Shaw. So Jim Shaw was a buckaroo from 1970 until today. I mean, of course, Buck Owens has passed away, but the buckaroos will still perform some. So Jim Shaw played keyboard. So if you ever see any footage of Buck with a keyboard player, that's Jim Shaw. And he usually stood up and played. And he's a great guy. And he was also, helped run Buck's businesses. And so he runs the Crystal Palace, the honky tonk out in Bakersfield. And he's a wonderful guy. And he provided a lot of information for me. So I have to thank him. And he told me that they had hundreds of these, and that I'm talking about original harmony ones, and that through the years that Buck would give them as gifts to people. So he would have a brass pickguard made up just like this one, and well, of course this is tortoiseshell, but in the same shape he'd have a brass pickguard made, and he'd put it on there, and it would have a message, and it would say to whoever the star was. So here's an example of the one he gave to Ringo Starr that sold for, I think, was it like $51,000. And so there you can see kind of what he did. But he would give away these guitars to people that he liked or performed with. And in later years, when he had the 3 different versions, so he had the harmony, the original USA harmony, he had the Korean one, and then he had the Chinese, Fender-made one, that he would, depending on if they were a serious guitar player, like if he was giving one to Vince Gill, then he would give one of the old harmonies, and he would call it the Gibson, give him a Gibson. And that's just because that was kind of how Buck remembered the deal, was that, of course, this was originally going to be a Gibson guitar, but it ended up being made by Harmony. So I thought it was really interesting that he did that. So then Jim Shaw shared with me that these guitars, both the USA made harmonies, the Korean versions, and the Chinese made ones, those are what kept the Buck's Crystal Palace open during COVID. So of course they couldn't be open to the public, and they still had bills to pay. They still had property taxes and all sorts of things to pay for. And so basically they became a guitar seller. And they went through hundreds of these guitars, and of course the Chinese and Korean made versions. And they were selling them new old stock. They were coming in the Sears boxes. And it's an amazing story, because it's as if Buck, from the grave, provided, for his company, for his legacy. Because at Crystal Palace, it's not just a bar and performing area. It's also a museum, and it's his legacy. And it's an incredible place. And if you ever have a chance to go to Bakersfield, you really need to go to the Crystal Palace, and you need to go see somebody play, and you need to get a chicken fried steak and get you a drink from the bar. It's an amazing place. And I've had the honor to play there, and I even got to play there with Buck. And that's a whole nother story. Meeting Buck was like meeting John Wayne. But Buck was an amazing person, and it's just like Buck to from the grave provide for his Crystal Palace. All right, I know we've gone along today, but I need to thank a couple of people. Again, I need to thank Aaron Parker for selling me this wonderful guitar. He's the guy that installs benders at Glaser Instruments. Great guy, great friend. I need to thank some of his cohorts there at Glaser that helped in this too. Max and Adam, and of course Nick Drushel. Also, I need to thank Jim Shaw again, a buckaroo, a living buckaroo. There's not many of those left, and for all of his info that made this episode possible. All right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed today's show, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.